Stand on the medieval walls of York today, and you can trace 2,000 years of stone beneath your feet. Roman foundations, Viking timber, Norman towers, all compressed into a single defensive ring. More than 7 million visitors walk these streets each year, photographing half-timbered shops that lean across cobblestones. But rewind 2 millennia, and you would have found Roman legionaries driving stakes into marshland at the confluence of 2 rivers, building a fortress that would anchor an empire's grip on the far north of Britannia. Legions, longships, cathedrals, industry. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every century of York's story. From the first Roman walls to the tourist city you can visit today. In AD 71, the 9th Legion arrived at the marshy confluence of the River Ouse and the River Foss. They called it Eboracum. Within a decade, timber ramparts rose on a natural ridge above the floodplain, anchoring Rome's conquest of the Brigantes tribes. By the end of the 1st century, the fortress had been rebuilt in stone. 50 acres of barracks, granaries, and a Principia headquarters that governed northern Britannia. Eboracum became more than a military base. In 208, Emperor Septimius Severus arrived with his sons to launch campaigns into Caledonia. He died here in 211, and his son Caracalla was proclaimed emperor within the fortress walls. Decades later, Constantine the Great was declared Augustus in York in 306, beginning a reign that would transform the Roman world. By the 4th century, a civilian settlement, the Colonia, sprawled south of the fortress, home to merchants, craftsmen, and retired soldiers. Bathhouses steamed, mosaics decorated the floors of stone townhouses. The city minted coins stamped with the image of emperors who ruled from the Danube to the Sahara. But Rome's grip on Britannia was weakening. The legions began pulling back in the early 5th century, called home to defend a collapsing empire. By 410, Eboracum was left to govern itself. The stones remained, but the empire did not. When the legions withdrew, the walls did not crumble overnight. For decades, Romano-British communities clung to the old civitas, minting their own crude coins, maintaining what order they could. But by the late 5th century, Anglo-Saxon warbands from across the North Sea were carving kingdoms out of Britannia's corpse. One of those kingdoms was Deira, and its rulers chose the old Roman site as a power center. They called it Eoforwich, the place of the wild boar. By the early 7th century, the city had become a royal seat. In 627, King Edwin of Northumbria was baptized here by the missionary Paulinus in a small wooden chapel built inside the ruins of the Roman Principia. That chapel would grow into the first York Minster. Edwin's successors turned Northumbria into a scholarly powerhouse. By the 8th century, Eoforwich housed one of Europe's great libraries. The scholar Alcuin taught here before Charlemagne summoned him to lead the Carolingian Renaissance. Students copied manuscripts by candlelight in scriptoria attached to the Minster. The city became a hub of trade as well, exporting woolen cloth and importing glass and wine from the Rhineland. Archaeological digs have uncovered workshops producing bone combs, iron tools, leather shoes. The old Roman street grid faded under new timber buildings. But the core remained. Then, in 866, a new force arrived. A Viking army, the Great Heathen Army, sailed up the Ouse and stormed the city. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the fall in terse prose. The Northumbrians made peace with the army. That peace came at the cost of a kingdom. Eoforwich fell, and the Vikings renamed it once again. Under Viking rule, the city became Jorvik, and for nearly a century it was the beating heart of Scandinavian power in England. The Danish warlords who seized the city in 866 installed puppet kings, then took the throne themselves. By the 870s, Jorvik was minting its own coins stamped with Thor's hammer and the names of Viking kings like Halfdan and Guthred. The city exploded in size. Timber houses packed the old Roman core and sprawled into new districts along the riverbanks. Excavations in the 1970s beneath Coppergate unearthed entire Viking streets, preserved in anaerobic mud, revealing a city of 10,000 souls. Workshops lined narrow lanes, producing everything from leather shoes to amber jewelry. Blacksmiths forged swords and axes. Potters shaped clay on wheels. The stench of tanning pits mixed with wood smoke and fish. Trade routes stretched from Jorvik to Dublin to Scandinavia to the Islamic world. Silver dirhams minted in Baghdad have been found in Viking York hoards. This was no rough frontier outpost. It was a cosmopolitan entrepot where Norse traders bargained with Frisian merchants, where Irish slaves hauled goods from wharves, where runic inscriptions were carved into stone crosses that also bore Christian iconography. The old Minster still stood, and gradually the Viking kings converted. By the early 10th century, the city was Christian again, its archbishops negotiating with both Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon powers. But Jorvik's independence was fragile. The kingdom of Wessex under Alfred the Great and his heirs was methodically reconquering the Danelaw. In 927, Athelstan, the first true king of England, seized Jorvik and forced the last Viking king, Guthfrith, into exile. Vikings would return. Eric Bloodaxe briefly ruled in the 940s and 950s. But the tide was turning. By 954, the last Scandinavian king was dead, and Jorvik was absorbed into a unified England. The Viking age in York was over, but the city the Norsemen built, dense, commercial, multilingual, would shape everything that followed. When William the Conqueror's army marched north in 1068, York resisted. The city rose in rebellion twice, and twice William crushed it. In the winter of 1069, his soldiers torched homes and salted fields in the harrying of the north, a campaign of deliberate starvation that killed thousands across Yorkshire. York's population collapsed. The Domesday Book, compiled in 1086, records vast stretches of wasteland where thriving villages had stood. But William also rebuilt. He ordered 2 massive Motte and Bailey castles constructed, one on each side of the Ouse. To pin the city under Norman control, the timber towers were later rebuilt in stone. Clifford's Tower, the surviving keep, still rises above the river today. The Normans rebuilt the Minster as well. In 1080, Thomas of Bayeux was appointed Archbishop of York, and he began raising a cathedral worthy of the second most important see in England. Over the next 3 centuries, generations of masons would expand and refine the structure. The current York Minster, completed in 1472, is the largest medieval Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe. Its great east window contains the world's largest expanse of medieval stained glass. Medieval York prospered. By the 13th century, it was England's second city after London. The Shambles, a narrow street of overhanging timber-framed shops, became a butcher's quarter where meat hung from hooks above the cobbles. Merchant guilds controlled the wool trade, shipping Yorkshire fleece to Flanders. The city walls were rebuilt in stone, encircling 2.5 miles. 45 churches served a population that may have reached 15,000. Jews arrived under Norman protection, establishing a prosperous community until 1190, when a mob besieged Clifford's Tower and 150 Jews chose mass suicide over forced conversion. It remains one of the darkest chapters in York's history. Plague struck in 1349, killing perhaps half the population, yet the city recovered. By the 15th century, York was a center of mystery plays, guild pageants that performed the entire biblical narrative on wagons through the streets each Corpus Christi. The Reformation shattered York's medieval religious life. In the 1530s, Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, seizing the wealth of St. Mary's Abbey and closing 40 religious houses across the city. The great Abbey church was stripped of its lead roof and left to collapse. Pilgrims stopped coming. The city's economy, long dependent on ecclesiastical traffic, contracted. During the English Civil War, York became a royalist stronghold. In 1644, a parliamentarian army laid siege for 11 weeks. The defenders held until Prince Rupert arrived with a relief force, but his army was annihilated at the Battle of Marston Moor, fought just west of the city. York surrendered. The Minster was spared, but the garrison was expelled and the city's fortifications were slighted so they could never again anchor a rebellion. For the next 2 centuries, York stagnated. The medieval walls became a curiosity rather than a necessity. Georgian aristocrats built elegant townhouses along new streets like Micklegate, turning the city into a social hub for Yorkshire's landed gentry during the winter season. The assembly rooms hosted balls, coffee houses buzzed with political gossip, but industrial growth passed York by. While Leeds and Manchester boomed with textile mills and coal, York remained a market town and ecclesiastical centre. The railway changed that. In 1839, George Hudson, the railway king, made York the hub of his expanding network. A massive railway station was built just outside the medieval walls in 1877, and suddenly the city was reconnected to the modern world. Chocolate followed. The Quaker families, Rowntree and Terry, built factories that turned York into the confectionery capital of Britain. By 1900, thousands worked in the chocolate works, and the smell of cocoa hung over the red brick terraces of the expanding suburbs. World War II brought danger close. The Baedeker Blitz, a Luftwaffe campaign targeting historic English cities, struck York in April 1942. Bombs fell on the railway station, destroying the roof of the great train shed. The medieval Guildhall burned. The Bar Convent was hit. 92 people died. Yet the Minster, miraculously, was untouched. In the post-war decades, York's industrial base eroded. The railways declined. Terry's closed in 2005, its factory demolished for housing. Rowntree was absorbed by Nestlé, and production moved abroad. But the city found a new purpose. By the 1970s, civic leaders recognized that York's history was its greatest asset. The Jorvik Viking Centre opened in 1984, built over the Coppergate excavation site, and pioneered the concept of experiential archaeology. Visitors descended into a reconstructed Viking street, complete with smells and animatronic craftsmen. It became one of Britain's most visited attractions. The medieval core was pedestrianised. The Shambles, once a working butcher's quarter, became a tableau of heritage tourism. The city walls were preserved, and walking the full circuit became a rite of passage. The National Railway Museum opened in 1975, housing the world's largest collection of historic locomotives. By the 21st century, York's economy ran on universities, tourism, and service industries. The University of York, founded in 1963, became one of the UK's top research institutions. Stand on the walls at sunset today, and the Minster glows amber against the sky, just as it has for half a millennium. The street plan beneath your feet is still Roman in places, Viking in others, medieval everywhere else. The Shambles leans, the ooze flows. The ghosts are thick here. Legionaries and emperors, missionaries and monks, Viking traders and Norman masons, royalist defenders and Georgian dandies, railway magnates and chocolate makers. Every century left its mark. Every conquest failed to erase what came before. York has been frontier, capital, ruin, and revival. It has burned and been rebuilt. It has been forgotten and rediscovered. What survives is not one city, but a palimpsest. 2,000 years written on the same ground. A city that refused to die.